supplies, almost half of Canadian consumption comes from offshore. Given that we exported 65% of Canadian production to the United States, including the majority of Newfoundland oil, how crazy is that? Only economists, those demented fundamentalists who think that the market can magically conjure up oil and natural gas, even when the geologists say it isn't there, would believe that it's okay for Canada to be importing all this oil and to have no plans to deal with an emergency. Don't worry, the market will take care of it. Now, how many of us are going to want to rely on the market to heat our homes in winter? In 2007, Atlantic Canadians imported 75% of their oil, and in Quebec it was 92%. In Ontario, 37%. And in Atlantic Canada, half the people heat their homes with heating oil. Well, how would a blockage of the Strait of Hormuz affect Canada? We got 8.6% of our imports from Saudi Arabia and another 7% from Iraq. A tiny amount from the United Arab Emirates, none at all from Iran, Kuwait, and Qatar. So Canada would be hit immediately with a 16% drop in its oil imports at the beginning of winter. Now that doesn't sound too bad if you look at it compared to Japan. 3/4 of all Japan's oil sails through the Strait of Hormuz every day, so they would have an even more enormous problem than us. But of course, if there was such a blockage, the crisis would trigger emergency sharing amongst the countries in the International Energy Agency. That is the body of industrial countries, which was the counterpart to OPEC. They're mainly the consuming countries, and they developed a pact at the U.S. initiative, Kissinger, after the first oil crisis of 1973-74. There was a trigger point. If 7% of the world's oil is cut, then the countries, the member countries in the International Energy Agency, are supposed to share their oil. It's never happened. That trigger has been reached. Hurricane Katrina cut 1.5%, so way below 7. There was some sharing of oil, but it wasn't the general sharing. So the closing of Hormuz would cause chaos on a colossal scale. So as a net exporting country, Canada would be expected to provide surge oil exports in the United States. But meanwhile, what do Canadians do to take care of themselves? Well, I was thinking, what would we do if this actually happened? We could send oil by tanker car, by rail car. We could maybe get tankers to go from BC around the Panama Canal to eastern Canada. Perhaps we could have oil tankers in the Great Lakes. None of these are very effective, nor quick, nor would they be cost effective. It just shows how little thinking and forethought that Canada has been doing. And there's been no discussion of this in Canada. We have not had a public discussion of this. You could just see from when, how many people have considered these possibilities. No one's talking about it, but they are in most developed countries. They're talking about these kinds of things. So the impact of the closing of Hormuz is hard to determine. Could Iran block the whole strait? For how long? Now there is an alternative pipeline in Saudi Arabia, the East-West pipeline from Abqaiq, the big Saudi refinery complex, that goes to the Red Sea. Can carry 5 million barrels a day, which is about 30% of the amount that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. How long would it take them to get that up and running? If it's a short crisis and the Americans manage to clear the strait quickly, all industrial countries would be able to cope partly through releasing oil from their strategic petroleum reserves. Because every other developed country in the world has strategic petroleum reserves, but Canada does not. every country in the International Energy Agency is supposed to have strategic petroleum reserves, but they make an exception. The exception is if you're a net exporting country. And what the IEA assumes is that the country is going to supply its own citizens first before it exports. And therefore, you don't need strategic petroleum reserves. Norway supplies oil to its own citizens before it exports, but it has strategic petroleum reserves anyways. So it is doubly protected. We have neither of those. What do Canadians know that 50 or so other countries that have strategic petroleum reserves don't know? Or is it perhaps the other way around? What do they know that the Canadian government does not? I wrote the National Energy Board in April of 2007, and I said, and of course the National Energy Board was set up in 1959 to make sure that Canadians have a secure supply of energy. That's their mandate. I said, what studies have you done on security of supply, and if there were international supply crisis? They wrote back and they said, we have done no studies. And in fact,